The snow had fallen thick across the Montana plains, blanketing the earth in silence and sorrow. Inside a lonely cabin, a single lamp flickered weakly, its light dancing across the weathered face of Elias Boone, a man who had once been known for his strength. But now, that strength had been replaced by grief. Only 3 days had passed since he buried Clara, his wife, the woman who had made the cold prairie feel like home. She left behind a child, their newborn daughter, swaddled in a thin blanket and crying softly in the cradle. Elias sat on the edge of his bed, his rough hands trembling as he tried to warm a bottle. But he had no milk. He had searched every corner of his ranch, prayed in the darkness, and even tried feeding the baby warm water mixed with honey. It wasn't enough. The tiny child's cries grew weaker, and Elias felt the kind of helplessness that could break a man. At dawn, with frost biting his beard, Elias saddled his horse and rode into the storm. The nearest town was miles away, and he barely had enough strength left in his heart to hope. The wind howled, stinging his face as he clutched a small bottle to his chest, whispering to himself, "Hold on, little one. Just hold on." But every door he knocked on, every farmhouse he passed, gave him the same answer. No milk, no nursing mother nearby, nothing to help. The storm worsened, and by nightfall, Elias turned back toward his ranch, defeated and desperate. When he reached home, the fire had almost gone out. The baby's cries were faint now, more whimper than sound. Elias dropped to his knees beside the cradle, tears cutting lines down his dusted cheeks. "Clara," he whispered, voice breaking, "I don't know what to do." Then came a sound, a knock at the door. 3 gentle raps, hesitant yet certain. Elias froze, unsure if it was real or a trick of the wind. When he opened the door, snowflakes rushed in, and there stood Annie Harper, the young woman from the neighboring ranch. She couldn't have been more than 20, but her eyes carried the calm strength of someone who had seen too much loss herself. She had heard what happened, everyone in the valley had. Without waiting for words, she stepped inside, clutching a bundle of warm blankets and a small basket. "I heard the baby crying last night," Annie said softly, setting down the basket. "I thought maybe I could help." Inside were small jars of goat milk, wrapped to keep warm, and a bit of bread for Elias. She had walked all the way in the freezing dark just to reach him. Elias stared at her, unable to speak. His pride, the same pride that had built his ranch, wanted to refuse her help. But the sight of his child, gasping weakly in the cradle, shattered it. Annie worked quickly. She warmed the milk near the fire, poured it gently into the bottle, and fed the baby with care and patience that only a mother's heart could show. Elias watched in silence as the baby drank, her tiny hands finally relaxing. For the first time in days, the sound of peace filled the cabin, the simple sound of a baby breathing softly in sleep. Tears glimmered in Elias's eyes as he whispered, "You saved her." Annie smiled, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "She saved herself. I just helped her a little." But Elias shook his head. "No, you brought hope back into this house." Over the following days, Annie kept visiting, sometimes with fresh milk, sometimes with broth, sometimes just to check on the baby. The cold winter slowly began to thaw, and so did the grief inside Elias's chest. He began to fix the fence again, to ride out and tend to the herd. Every evening, Annie would sit by the fire, humming to the baby, while Elias listened from the doorway. The cabin, once filled with sorrow, now felt alive again. One night, after putting the baby to sleep, Annie turned to leave. Elias stopped her at the door. "Annie," he said quietly, "I can't repay you for what you've done." She smiled, shaking her head. "You don't need to." "Sometimes. Kindness is just what the land asks of us." But as she stepped out into the snow, he caught her hand. "Stay for supper, at least," he said. And for the first time in months, Elias Boone smiled, not because the pain had gone, but because light had finally found its way back into the dark corners of his heart. Seasons passed, and the valley bloomed again. The ranch that once echoed with loss now rang with laughter. The little girl grew strong. Her father proud, and Annie, now a part of their lives, brought warmth that no storm could ever take away. Elias often looked back on that cold winter and realized something simple yet powerful. Sometimes help doesn't come from where you expect. It comes from those brave enough to knock on your door when you need them most. So if you ever feel lost, broken, or alone, remember this story. Hope can arrive in the quietest moments, and miracles often wear the face of kindness if this story touched your heart. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming cowboy tales of love, loss, and redemption. Your support helps keep these stories alive, and together we can bring a little more light into this world.